The winter wind howled like a wounded animal as Diana Sutherland stumbled through the snow, her thin cotton dress already soaked through to her skin, her fingers losing feeling with every passing moment. Behind her, the grand house where she had lived for the past 3 years stood dark and unforgiving, the door locked tight against her pleas, and in front of her stretched nothing but white wilderness and the faint lights of Bodie, California, still 2 miles distant through the blizzard that the locals were already calling the worst storm in a decade. She had believed that marrying Thomas Sutherland would mean security, family, love, but his death from pneumonia 6 weeks ago had revealed the truth that his parents had hidden behind polite smiles and cold eyes. Without their son to protect her, without the grandson she had failed to provide in 3 years of marriage, she was nothing to them but an inconvenient reminder of their loss and a drain on their resources. When she had returned from town this afternoon to find her belongings scattered in the snow and the locks changed, her mother-in-law had stood at the upstairs window, watching with satisfaction as Diana pounded on the door and begged to be let inside. The wind pushed her sideways and she fell to her knees in a drift that came up to her waist. Her wedding ring, the only thing of value she still possessed, caught the fading light as she pushed herself upright again. The cold had moved past pain into something worse, a numbness that made her limbs feel distant and uncooperative. She knew enough about winter to understand what that meant. If she did not find shelter soon, they would find her frozen body in the spring thaw, another cautionary tale about the cruelty of the High Sierra winters. The lights of Bodie seemed to grow no closer no matter how many steps she took. Her feet had stopped hurting, which she knew was a terrible sign. The boarding house where she might have sought refuge was on the far side of town, and she had no money to pay for a room anyway. The few friends she had made in Bodie were sparse and scattered, and she could not remember where any of them lived, could not think through the fog that was settling over her mind like the snow settling over the landscape. She fell again, and this time getting up took longer. Her hands would not work properly, would not push her weight up from the ground. The wind screamed around her, and she thought perhaps it would be easier to simply lie here, to let the snow cover her like a blanket and drift into sleep. Thomas was gone. Her parents were gone, buried in a cholera epidemic back in Ohio 5 years before, and there was no one left who would mourn her passing. But something stubborn in her, some core of determination that had carried her west as a mail-order bride, that had sustained her through a loveless marriage, and the constant disappointment in her mother-in-law's eyes pushed her to her feet one more time. She took another step and another, no longer certain she was even walking in the right direction, seeing only white and shadow and the occasional dark shape of a tree or building emerging from the storm. Then she saw it, a small cabin set back from the main road, smoke rising from its chimney in a gray column that the wind immediately scattered. Light glowed in the windows, warm and golden and promising life. She changed direction, wading through snow that was now past her knees, focusing every remaining bit of strength on reaching that door. She fell against it rather than knocking, her shoulder hitting the wood with a thud that she felt more than heard over the howling wind. Nothing happened. She tried to lift her hand to knock properly, but her arm would not obey. She slumped against the doorframe, feeling consciousness starting to slip away, feeling the terrible warmth that she knew meant her body was giving up its fight against the cold. The door opened suddenly, and she fell forward into warmth and light, into strong arms that caught her before she hit the floor. "Jesus Christ," a man's voice said, rough with shock, "you are half frozen to death." She tried to speak, to explain, to apologize for intruding, but her jaw would not work. Her teeth chattering so hard she bit her tongue. She tasted blood, copper and sharp. all right, I have got you," the voice said, and she felt herself being lifted, carried deeper into the cabin. The warmth hurt, pins and needles spreading through her limbs as sensation started to return. She whimpered, a small animal sound she could not hold back. "I know it hurts," he said. and there was genuine compassion in his voice. "But that pain means you are alive. Stay with me now." She was lowered onto something soft, a bed or a sofa, and then he was moving around her, his hands efficient and impersonal as he stripped away her wet dress. She should have been mortified, should have protested, but she could not seem to care, could only focus on the growing pain as her frozen body began to thaw. He wrapped her in blankets, thick wool that scratched against her skin but held the warmth close. Then he was lifting her again, holding a cup to her lips. "Small sips," he instructed. "It is just warm water. Anything else will make you sick." She obeyed, though swallowing was difficult. The water was barely tepid, but it felt hot against her throat. After a few sips, he took the cup away and tucked the blankets more tightly around her. "What is your name?" he asked. "Diana," she managed, the word coming out mangled by her still chattering teeth. "Diana Sutherland!" "You are Thomas Sutherland's widow," he said, and it was not a question. "I heard he passed last month. I am sorry for your loss." She said nothing, unsure what response was appropriate. Her loss had been more relief than grief, though she had tried to mourn properly, had worn her black dress and veil, and stood at his graveside with appropriate solemnity. "I am Ethan Sterling," the man said. He moved into her line of sight for the first time, and she saw a tall man in his late 20s with dark hair that fell almost to his shoulders and eyes the color of weathered wood. His face was angular and sun-weathered, with a scar running along his left jaw, and his hands, which had been so gentle with her, were calloused and strong. He wore simple clothes, wool trousers, and a flannel shirt rolled to his elbows despite the cold outside, and there was a quiet competence about him that made her feel for the first time in hours that she might actually survive this night. "Why were you out in the storm?" he asked, settling into a chair near where she lay. "Body is no place to be wandering in a blizzard." "I had nowhere else to go," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "My in-laws, they put me out. Changed the locks, told me I was no longer welcome in their home." His expression darkened. "They threw you out in this weather?" "They said I had been living on their charity long enough," she whispered. "That with Thomas gone, I had no claim to their protection or their resources. I tried to explain that I had nowhere to go, no money, but they would not listen. Margaret, my mother-in-law, she just watched from the window while I begged." "That woman has ice where her heart should be," Ethan said. "I have heard stories about the way she treats the people who work for them. But this is beyond cruel. This is attempted murder." Diana had not thought of it in those terms, but she realized he was right. Her in-laws had known exactly what they were doing when they locked her out in the worst storm of the winter. They had known she would likely die, had perhaps hoped for it. One less loose end to their son's unfortunate marriage. "I should report them to the sheriff," Ethan continued, his jaw tight with anger. "Have them arrested for what they have done." "Please do not," Diana said quickly, "and they are powerful people in this town. They own the biggest mine, employ half the men in Bodie. No one would believe me over them, and it would only make things worse." "Worse than nearly freezing to death?" "They could make it, so no one would hire me, no one would rent me a room. I need to find work, need to survive, and I cannot do that if I make enemies of the Sutherlands." Ethan studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You are probably right, though it sticks in my craw to let them get away with it. But you are safe here for now. Rest, get warm. We will figure out what comes next in the morning." She wanted to protest, to say she could not impose, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a riptide, and the warmth of the blankets and the crackling fire in the hearth were impossible to resist. Her eyes drifted closed, and she heard Ethan moving around the cabin, the soft sounds of him banking the fire and settling in for the night, and then she knew nothing more. When she woke, weak winter sunlight was streaming through the window, and the storm had passed, leaving behind a world buried in white. She was still wrapped in the blankets, still lying on what she now saw was a simple sofa near the fireplace. Her dress was hanging on a line near the fire, still damp but no longer dripping. Ethan was at the stove, cooking something that smelled like heaven, and when he heard her stir, he turned with a slight smile. "How are you feeling, War?" he asked. "Alive," she said, and was surprised to find it was true. Her fingers and toes ached, and her skin felt tender where the cold had bitten deepest. But she could move everything, could think clearly. "Thanks to you." "You are a survivor," he said. "I just gave you a warm place to thaw out. The rest was all you." He brought over a plate of eggs and fried potatoes, simple fare, but more food than she had seen in days. Her in-laws had been reducing her portion steadily since Thomas's death, another small cruelty among many. She ate slowly, trying not to wolf the food down like a starving animal, though that was exactly how she felt. Ethan watched her with those calm, assessing eyes, and she wondered what he saw when he looked at her. A charity case? A problem to be solved? Or perhaps just a woman who had been dealt a bad hand and was trying to play it as best she could. "What will you do?" he asked when she had finished eating. "Find work," she said. "There must be someone in Body who needs help. I can cook and clean, mend clothes, care for children. I am not afraid of hard work." "Most of the decent positions will be taken," Ethan said gently. "And the ones that are not decent, well, I think you know what I'm talking about." She did. Body had more than its share of saloons and brothels, places where women with no other options could find work of a sort. The thought made her stomach turn, but she also knew that desperation could make almost anything seem bearable. She had nowhere to live, no money, and winter in the high Sierras could last well into April. She needed to eat, needed shelter, and pride would not keep her alive. "I will find something," she said, lifting her chin. "I have to." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then said, "I have a proposition for you. It is not charity before you start getting your back up. I could use help here. Someone to cook proper meals instead of the bachelor fare I have been living on. Keep the place clean, mend my clothes when they need it. The cabin is small, but there is a loft where you could have privacy, and I would pay you fair wages. Enough to save up for your own place eventually, if that is what you want." Diana stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would let me stay here? Work for you?" "If you are willing," he said. "I know it is not an ideal situation. People will talk. A widow, living in a bachelor's cabin. But I figure your reputation has already taken a hit from your in-laws' behavior. And at least this way you would be warm and fed while you figure out your next step." "Why would you do this for me?" she asked. "You do not even know me." "I know you were brave enough to walk through a blizzard rather than give up," he said. "I know you have been treated with cruelty by people who should have protected you, and I know what it is like to be alone in a place that does not care if you live or die. Maybe that is enough." There was something in his voice, some old pain that echoed her own, and she found herself nodding before she could think better of it. "I accept," she said, "and I promise you will not regret it. I will work harder than any hand you have ever hired." "I believe you," Ethan said, and he held out his hand. She took it, feeling the rough warmth of his palm against hers, and knew that whatever else happened, her life had just taken a turn she could never have anticipated. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that was both strange and comforting. Diana woke each morning in the loft, which Ethan had made as comfortable as possible with a real bed and extra blankets, and came down to start the fire and prepare breakfast. Ethan was a rancher of sorts, running a small herd of cattle on the grasslands outside Bodie, and doing occasional work as a carpenter when the weather made ranching impossible. He left early each morning to tend his animals and returned in the evening tired and hungry, ready for the hot meal Diana had prepared. She threw herself into the work with a ferocity that surprised even her. She scrubbed the cabin until it gleamed, mended every piece of clothing Ethan owned, and cooked meals that made him close his eyes in appreciation. It was not that she was trying to prove herself exactly, though there was an element of that. It was more that for the first time in years, she felt useful, valued. Ethan never treated her like a burden or an obligation. He thanked her for her work, paid her exactly what he had promised at the end of each week, and gave her space to breathe and heal from the wounds her marriage had left. They talked in the evening, sitting by the fire while the wind howled outside. She learned that Ethan had come west from Missouri after his parents died in a house fire when he was 19, that he had worked a series of rough jobs before saving enough to buy his small ranch, that he had once been engaged, but she had broken it off when she realized how hard life in Bodie would be. "I think she expected something different," he said one night, staring into the flames. "Something more like what she had back east, with society and parties and fine things. When she saw what my life actually was, how much work it took just to survive out here, she decided it was not for her." "That must have hurt," Diana said softly. "It did," he admitted. "But looking back, I can see we were not suited. She wanted things I could never give her, and I wanted someone who could love this life, hard as it is. Someone who saw the beauty in it instead of just the struggle." "There is beauty here," Diana said, thinking of the way the sunrise painted the snowy peaks pink and gold, the stark majesty of the landscape that surrounded them. "But I think you have to be willing to look for it." "You see it," Ethan said, turning to look at her. "I can tell by the way you watch the mountains in the morning." She felt heat rise in her cheeks, surprised that he had noticed. She was not used to being seen, really seen by anyone. Thomas had looked through her most days, his attention always elsewhere, and his parents had looked at her with nothing but cold assessment. But Ethan looked at her like she mattered, like her thoughts and feelings were worth his time, and it created a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. As January turned to February, something shifted between them. It was nothing overt, nothing that could be easily named, but Diana felt it in the way Ethan's hand would linger when he passed her something at dinner, in the way his eyes followed her when she moved around the cabin, in the way her heart jumped when she heard his footsteps on the porch in the evening. She told herself it was foolish, that she was simply grateful to him for saving her life, that anything else was her imagination running wild. But then came the night when a branch, heavy with ice, crashed through the loft window, and she woke to freezing wind and shattered glass. She called out in alarm, and Ethan was there in seconds, climbing the ladder to assess the damage. "We need to board this up before the whole cabin freezes," he said, already moving to get tools and lumber. He worked quickly, nailing planks across the broken window while Diana held the lantern and tried to keep from shivering in the icy draft. When he finished, he turned to her and said, "You cannot sleep up here tonight. It is too cold. Take my bed, and I will sleep on the sofa." "I cannot take your bed," she protested. "You have already done so much for me." "Diana," he said, and the way he said her name, soft and firm at once, made her breath catch. "Take the bed. Please. I will not be able to sleep knowing you are up here freezing." She nodded, too moved to argue further, and followed him down the ladder. His bed was in the corner of the cabin, a simple frame with a thick mattress that she knew from changing the sheets was far more comfortable than anything she had slept on in years. She climbed under the covers, still warm from his body, and caught the scent of him, wood smoke and leather, and something indefinably masculine that made her pulse quicken. Ethan settled on the sofa, wrapping himself in the same blankets that had saved her life that first night. Diana lay awake for a long time, listening to him breathe, feeling the strange intimacy of sharing space with him in the darkness. She thought about Thomas, about the dutiful affection that had been the most their marriage had achieved, and realized with startling clarity that what she felt for Ethan was something entirely different, something she had read about in books but never expected to experience herself. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have terrified her. She had been widowed less than 3 months, was living in his cabin and dependent on his generosity, had no business entertaining romantic feelings for anyone. But the heart, she was learning, did not care about propriety or timing or practical considerations. It simply felt what it felt. And what she felt for Ethan Sterling was growing stronger with every passing day. The question was whether he felt anything similar, or whether she was simply a responsibility he had taken on out of the goodness of his heart. She got her answer a week later when Ethan asked her to accompany him into town to buy supplies. It was the first time she had left the cabin since that terrible night, and she felt nervous about facing the people of Body, knowing that by now everyone would have heard about where she was living and with whom. Her fears proved justified. As they walked down the main street, Diana felt eyes following them, heard whispers that were not quite soft enough to miss. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store, served them with tight-lipped disapproval, and when they passed a group of women outside the church, one of them deliberately turned her back. Diana kept her head high, refusing to show how much the silent condemnation hurt. But Ethan must have sensed her distress because he took her elbow gently and steered her towards the quieter end of town. "I am sorry," he said. "I should have known how they would react." "You have nothing to apologize for," Diana said. "You saved my life. If people want to make something sordid out of that, it says more about them than it does about us." "You are right," Ethan said, "but I hate that you have to endure their judgment on top of everything else you have been through." They were passing the alley behind the bank when a voice called out sharp and mocking, "Well, if it is not the merry widow and her cowboy savior." Diana turned to see Margaret Sutherland standing there, wrapped in expensive furs, her face twisted with contempt. Beside her was her husband, Harold, a portly man who had always seemed more tired than cruel, but who made no move to stop his wife's venom. "Mrs. Sutherland," Diana said, keeping her voice level with effort. "I hear you have set up house with Mr. Sterling," Margaret said. "How quickly you have moved on from my poor son's memory, though I suppose I should not be surprised. You never did have any proper feeling." "Your poor son?" Diana could not help the words that came out, sharp and angry. "Your son, who you controlled every moment of his life? Who was never allowed to make a decision without your approval? Who died still trying to win your love?" Margaret's face flushed an ugly red. "How dare you speak about Thomas that way? You who were never worthy of him, who could not even give him a child." "That is enough," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You threw Diana out into a blizzard, left her to die because you no longer had use for her. You do not get to stand here now and judge her for surviving." "This is family business," Harold Sutherland said, speaking for the first time. "It does not concern you. Sterling." "It became my business when I found her half frozen on my doorstep," Ethan shot back. "When I had to thaw her out and watch her shake so hard I thought her teeth would break. You people are supposed to be pillars of this community, but you have less compassion than the coyotes on my ranch." "We will see how long your compassion lasts," Margaret said coldly. "When you realize what sort of woman you have taken in, she is barren, useless, and from what my son told me, cold as a mountain stream in bed. But perhaps that is all a rough cowboy like you can attract." Diana felt tears prick her eyes, not from the insults, which were nothing new, but from the sheer hatred in Margaret's voice. But before she could respond, Ethan stepped between them, his body a solid barrier. "You are a bitter, cruel woman," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "And you know nothing about Diana except what your own poisonous mind has imagined. Now leave us alone, before I forget that I was raised to respect my elders." He took Diana's arm and guided her away, leaving the Sutherlands standing in the alley. Diana was shaking, but not from cold this time, from rage and hurt, and a strange, fierce joy that someone had finally stood up for her, had finally seen her worth and defended it. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked when they were out of earshot. "No," Diana said honestly, "but I will be. Thank you for what you said back there." "I meant every word," Ethan said. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands coming up to rest gently on her shoulders. "Diana, I need to tell you something. And I apologize if it is too soon or unwelcome, but I cannot keep it inside any longer. You are not barren or useless or cold. You are brave and strong and kind. And these past weeks with you have been the happiest I can remember in years. I know you have been through hell, and I know you might not be ready to hear this, but I'm falling in love with you. I think I have been since the night I caught you in my doorway." Diana's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Ethan," she whispered, "I am falling in love with you too. I have been so afraid to admit it, afraid it was too soon, or that I was just grateful, or that you could not possibly feel the same way. But I do. I love you." His face transformed, a smile breaking across it like sunrise over the mountains. And then he was pulling her close, his arms wrapping around her in a way that felt like coming home. She buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, feeling safe and cherished in a way she had never experienced before. "We are going to cause even more scandal now," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Let them talk," Ethan said. "I have never cared much what people thought of me, and I am not going to start now. You are what matters. Us together, that is what matters." He pulled back just enough to look down at her, and the love in his eyes was so clear, so undeniable, that she felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of fear and unworthiness that had been there so long she had forgotten it was not a natural part of her. "I want to do this right," Ethan said. "Court you properly. Marry you when enough time has passed that no one can say we rushed into things. I want to give you the life you deserve, Diana. I know I cannot offer you luxury or fine society, but I can offer you love and respect and a partnership built on honesty. If that is enough for you, then I am yours for as long as you will have me." "That is more than enough," Diana said, reaching up to touch his face, tracing the line of that scar along his jaw. "That is everything I have ever wanted and never knew how to ask for." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Diana felt the world narrow down to just the two of them. Two people who had found each other in the middle of a harsh winter and discovered something worth more than gold. The months that followed were not easy. The gossip intensified when word spread that Ethan and Diana were courting, and more than once Diana faced cold stares or cutting remarks when she went into town. But Ethan stood by her through all of it, and gradually, a few of the kinder souls in Bodie began to come around. Mrs. Patterson, a widow who ran a small restaurant, hired Diana to help with baking twice a week, providing her with a small additional income and a measure of independence. Mr. Chen, who owned the laundry, nodded respectfully when they passed on the street, and young Sarah Miller, barely 18 and newly married herself, went out of her way to strike up a friendship with Diana, undeterred by the disapproval of the older women. Spring came slowly to the high country, the snow melting in fits and starts, revealing the brown grass and gray rock beneath. Ethan's cattle, which had survived the winter despite his worries, began to fatten on the new growth, and he talked about buying more land, expanding his operation now that he had someone to build a future with. They set a wedding date for June, giving enough time for propriety, but not so long that it felt like an eternity. Diana made her own dress, simple white cotton with lace at the collar that she traded her baking services for, and Ethan bought a new suit from the tailor, looking uncomfortable but determined when he tried it on. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect mountain day that made all the harsh winter months worthwhile. The ceremony was small, held in the church with only a handful of guests, but Diana did not care about the numbers. She cared about the way Ethan looked at her as she walked down the aisle, like she was the most precious thing in the world. She cared about the steadiness of his voice as he spoke his vows, promising to love and cherish her all his days. And she cared about the weight of the ring he slipped onto her finger, a simple gold band that represented everything she had never had in her first marriage: true love, genuine partnership, and a future built on mutual respect. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, and she kissed him back with all the love and hope that filled her heart. The celebration afterward was modest, just cake and coffee in the church hall, but it felt perfect to Diana. Sarah Miller had brought wildflowers to decorate the tables, and Mrs. Patterson had contributed extra pastries, her way of showing support without openly defying the social order. Even Harold Sutherland made a brief appearance, though Margaret was conspicuously absent. He shook Ethan's hand stiffly and told Diana he hoped she would be happy. And though it was not an apology for what they had done, it was something. That night, In the cabin that was now truly theirs together, Ethan carried Diana over the threshold and set her down gently in the room they would share. The loft had been converted into storage, and the main bedroom expanded, creating a space that felt like a haven from the world outside. "Are you happy?" Ethan asked, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Diana said honestly. "You saved my life that night in the storm, Ethan, but you did so much more than that. You gave me a reason to want to live, a future worth fighting for. I love you so much." "I love you too," he said, pulling her close. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on a rough cowboy with more heart than sense." "You have plenty of sense," Diana said, smiling against his chest, "and the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. I am the lucky one, Ethan Sterling." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Diana let herself get lost in the sensation, in the feeling of being loved and desired and valued for exactly who she was. Her first marriage had been duty and disappointment, but this, what she had with Ethan, was everything marriage was supposed to be. Their first year together was marked by hard work and simple joys. They woke early each morning and worked side by side, Diana managing the household while Ethan tended the ranch. They ate meals together, talking about their days and making plans for the future. They read to each other in the evenings, sharing books they borrowed from the small library in town. And they made love with a passion and tenderness that never faded, each time a reaffirmation of their bond. In the fall, Diana discovered she was pregnant. She had not dared to hope for it, knowing her first marriage had been childless, and fearing Margaret's cruel assessment might be true. But as the weeks passed and her symptoms grew undeniable, she felt a joy so profound it was almost frightening. When she told Ethan, he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with delight. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Diana asked, knowing it was a silly question but needing to hear the answer anyway. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Ethan said, setting her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "You have given me everything, Diana. A home, a real home, not just a place to sleep. Love that makes every day worth living. And now a child. I am the most blessed man in California." The pregnancy was not easy. Diana suffered from terrible morning sickness in the first months, and as she grew larger, the summer heat made her uncomfortable and tired. But Ethan was attentive and gentle, taking on extra chores without complaint and rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings. Dr. Morrison, the town physician, checked on her regularly and pronounced everything progressing normally, which eased some of Diana's fears. In late March, on a day when the snow was finally beginning to melt in earnest, Diana went into labor. Ethan rode for the doctor and Mrs. Patterson, who had offered to serve as midwife, and then paced the cabin like a caged animal while Diana labored in their bedroom. The birth was long and difficult, hours of pain that left Diana exhausted and certain she could not go on. But Mrs. Patterson was steady and encouraging, and the thought of Ethan waiting just outside the door gave her strength she did not know she possessed. Finally, as the sun was setting, she heard the sharp, angry cry of a newborn, and Mrs. Patterson was placing a squirming, red-faced baby in her arms. "You have a son," the older woman said with a smile. "A healthy, strong boy." Diana looked down at her child, at his tiny fists and screwed-up face, and felt love slam into her with the force of a physical blow. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, and he was hers. "Can Ethan come in?" she asked, not taking her eyes off the baby. Mrs. Patterson opened the door, and Ethan was there immediately, moving to the bedside with an expression of awe and wonder. "Diana," he breathed. Are you—" "We are fine," Diana said, smiling despite her exhaustion. "Both of us. Ethan, meet your son." Ethan reached out with trembling hands to touch the baby's tiny head, his fingers looking impossibly large and rough against such delicate skin. "He is beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He looks like you." "He has your nose," Diana said, and they both laughed, giddy with relief and joy. They named him Elijah Thomas Sterling, the middle name a nod to Diana's first husband, because for all the unhappiness of that marriage, it had brought her to Body and ultimately to Ethan. It felt right to acknowledge that, to let their son carry a piece of that history. Elijah was a good baby, healthy and strong, and watching Ethan with him melted Diana's heart a little more each day. Ethan was a natural father, patient and tender, singing old songs while he rocked the baby to sleep and making silly faces to coax out smiles. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding it until the wood was smooth as silk, and carved little animals to hang above it. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic than before, but infinitely richer. Diana managed the household and cared for Elijah while Ethan worked the ranch, but they made time for each other too, stealing moments of connection in the midst of their busy days. When Elijah was 6 months old, something unexpected happened. Harold Sutherland appeared at their door one afternoon, looking older and frailer than Diana remembered. Ethan opened the door with a wary expression, and Diana came to stand beside him, Elijah in her arms. "I heard you had a child," Harold said, his eyes fixed on the baby. "A grandson I will never know." Diana felt Ethan tense beside her, ready to defend her, but she put a hand on his arm. "What do you want, Harold?" "To apologize," he said, and he sounded sincere. "For what Margaret and I did to you, throwing you out in the storm. It has haunted me, Diana. I wake up some nights and think about what could have happened, what almost did happen, and I'm ashamed. Margaret, she is eaten up with grief and bitterness, and I let her poison me against you, but that is no excuse. What we did was unforgivable." "Yes, it was," Diana agreed quietly. "You nearly killed me, Harold. If Ethan had not taken me in, I would have frozen to death." "I know," Harold said, his shoulders slumping, "and I have to live with that knowledge for the rest of my days. I am not asking for forgiveness because I do not deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry, truly sorry, and that I am glad you survived and found happiness. That baby, he is beautiful. You would have been a wonderful mother to Thomas's children if we had not interfered so much in your marriage." Diana felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of a burden she had been carrying finally lifting. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "It means more than you might think." Harold nodded, started to turn away, then stopped. "Margaret will never apologize," he said. "She is too proud, too convinced she was in the right. But I wanted you to know that not all of us feel that way. I wish you every happiness, Diana. You and your husband and your child." He left then, walking slowly back to his carriage, and Diana watched him go with mixed emotions. She could not forget what the Sutherlands had done to her, but she could let go of the anger and hurt she had been holding on to. She had Ethan and Elijah now, a family that loved her unconditionally, and that was enough. As Elijah grew from a baby into a toddler, the ranch prospered. Ethan expanded his herd and bought additional acreage, and Diana started selling her baked goods to several establishments in town, bringing in extra income that they saved carefully. They talked about their dreams, about maybe one day having a bigger house, about giving Elijah brothers and sisters to grow up with, about growing old together on the land they loved. When Elijah was 3, Diana became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. In the fall, she gave birth to a daughter, a tiny dark-haired girl they named Delilah Rose Sterling. Elijah was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her and help with everything, and Ethan joked that they would need to build an addition to the cabin soon to accommodate their growing family. 2 years after that, another son arrived, Samuel James Sterling, completing their family. The cabin that had once housed a lonely cowboy and a desperate widow was now filled with the chaos and joy of children, with laughter and arguments and the constant motion of young lives. Diana sometimes thought back to that terrible winter night when she had stumbled through the storm, certain she was going to die. She thought about how close she had come to giving up, to lying down in the snow and letting the cold take her. And she thought about the moment Ethan had opened his door, how his simple act of compassion had not just saved her life, but transformed it entirely. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked one evening, coming up behind her as she stood on the porch watching the sunset. The children were inside, playing some elaborate game that involved a lot of shouting, and for a moment they had a pocket of peace. "About the night we met," Diana said, leaning back against him. "About how different everything could have been." "I think about that too sometimes," Ethan admitted. "About all the things that had to happen for you to end up at my door. If the storm had been even a little less severe, you might have made it to town. If I had not been home, if I had been out checking on the cattle or in town myself, it seems like fate." "Or luck," Diana said. "The best luck I have ever had." "I am the lucky one," Ethan said, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I was content before you, Diana, but I was not happy. Not really. You taught me what happiness feels like, what love is supposed to be." Diana turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his face. 15 years of marriage and 3 children had added lines around his eyes and silver threads to his hair, but to her he was as handsome as the day he had caught her falling through his doorway. "We taught each other," she said. "I did not know what I was capable of until I met you. Did not know I could be strong or brave or worthy of love. You showed me all of that." "You were always those things," Ethan said. "I just gave you a safe place to remember it." They kissed then, slow and sweet, the kind of kiss that spoke of years of shared history and years more to come. Inside, one of the children called out needing something, and they broke apart with a laugh. "Duty calls," Diana said. "It does," Ethan agreed. "But tonight, after they are asleep, I want to hold you and remind you how much I love you." "I will hold you to that, Mr. Sterling," Diana said with a smile, and together they went inside to tend to their children, their family, their life. The years continued to pass, marked by the usual milestones and challenges of raising children and running a ranch. Elijah grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as he loved horses. Delilah was spirited and adventurous, always climbing trees and exploring the hills. Samuel was the charmer, able to talk his way out of trouble with a smile and a clever excuse. Ethan taught them all to ride, to care for the animals, to understand the land and respect it. Diana taught them to read and write, to cook and mend, to be kind and honest. Together they tried to give their children the stability and love that both of them had lacked at various points in their lives. Body changed around them as well. The mines began to play out and people started leaving for other boomtowns, other opportunities. The population that had once numbered in the thousands dwindled to hundreds, then less. The Sutherland mine closed when Harold died, Margaret having preceded him by several years, her bitterness finally consuming her completely. Their grand house stood empty, a monument to wealth and cruelty. But Ethan and Diana stayed. This was their home, the place where they had found each other, and they could not imagine living anywhere else. The ranch continued to thrive even as the town shrank around it, and they became elders of the community, respected and loved by those who remained. When Elijah turned 18, he announced his intention to attend college in San Francisco to study law. Diana was proud and heartbroken all at once, wanting him to have opportunities she and Ethan had never had, but already missing him terribly. Ethan seemed to understand, holding her while she cried the night before Elijah left, and reminding her that they had raised him to be independent and ambitious. Delilah surprised them by falling in love with ranching as fiercely as any boy could, declaring that she would stay and work the land with her father. Ethan beamed with pride, and Diana could not help but laugh at how her daughter had turned out, fierce and capable and utterly herself. Samuel was still young enough that his future was uncertain, but he talked about being a doctor, inspired by old Dr. Morrison, who still made his rounds despite being well into his 70s. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Diana on a trip, leaving the children in the care of Mrs. Patterson's daughter for a few days. They rode up into the mountains to a high meadow that Ethan had discovered years ago and camped under the stars. 20 years, Diana said, lying in Ethan's arms while the fire crackled and the night sky wheeled overhead. It seems like forever and no time at all. I would live every moment again, Ethan said, even the hard parts, if it meant ending up here with you. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had not opened your door that night? Diana asked. All the time, Ethan admitted, and I cannot imagine it would have been half as good. You are my everything, Diana, you and our children, this life we have built together. You are my whole world. And you are mine, Diana said, feeling tears slide down her temples. I was so lost before I found you, Ethan, so certain that my life was over, that I had nothing left to live for, but you showed me that beginnings can come from the darkest endings, that love can bloom even in the harshest winter. They made love under the stars, slow and tender, 20 years of intimacy making it both familiar and new. Afterward, Diana lay with her head on Ethan's chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling more content than she had ever thought possible. The next morning, they rode back down the mountain to their family, to their life, to the ranch that had become a symbol of everything they had overcome and everything they had achieved. More years passed, a blur of seasons and memories. Elijah graduated from college and returned to Bodie to open a law practice, defending miners and small ranchers against the big companies that still tried to exploit them. He married a kind, intelligent woman named Charlotte, and they gave Ethan and Diana their first grandchildren, twin girls who had their grandfather's eyes and their grandmother's determination. Delilah took over more and more of the ranch operations as Ethan aged, proving herself more than capable. She married late, to a cowboy who had drifted into town and been hired as a hand, and they expanded the ranch further, buying up land from people who were leaving. Samuel did become a doctor, studying in San Francisco and then returning to Bodie to take over Dr. Morrison's practice when the old man finally retired. He married his childhood sweetheart, the daughter of the town blacksmith, and they settled into the house that had once belonged to the Sutherlands, which had been purchased at auction and renovated into a family home and medical office. Ethan and Diana grew old together, their hair turning silver, their bodies becoming less spry, but their love never diminishing. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, holding hands like young sweethearts. "Do you have any regrets?" Diana asked him one evening, when they were both well into their 60s. "Only one," Ethan said, "that we did not get even more years together. But that is greedy of me, I know. We have been blessed beyond measure." "We have," Diana agreed. "I never thought I would live to see grandchildren, let alone great-grandchildren. Never thought I would have a life filled with so much love and joy." "You gave me all of that, Ethan?" "We gave it to each other," Ethan corrected gently. "That is what marriage is supposed to be, Diana. Two people building something together, something stronger than either of them could create alone." Diana thought about that, about the truth of it. She thought about the frightened, desperate woman she had been that winter night, and the strong, confident woman she had become. She thought about Ethan, who had started as her rescuer and become her partner, her lover, her best friend. She thought about their children and grandchildren, the legacy of love they were leaving behind. "I want you to know something," she said, squeezing his hand. "If I had to do it all over again, every hardship, every moment of pain and fear, I would, because it all led me to you, and that makes everything worthwhile." Ethan raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I feel exactly the same way," he said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Diana Sterling. The very best thing." They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a life that was rich and full and meaningful. Around them, their family thrived, their children and grandchildren carrying forward the values of hard work, kindness, and love that Ethan and Diana had instilled in them. As winter approached once more, Diana found herself standing outside, watching the first snowflakes fall. She was older now, her joints aching with the cold, but she was no longer afraid of winter. How could she be when winter had brought her the greatest gift of her life? Ethan came out to join her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders and pulling her close. "Come inside," he said. "It is too cold out here." "In a moment," Diana said. "I just wanted to watch the snow fall. Do you remember the night we met? How terrible the storm was." "I remember every detail," Ethan said. "The sound you made when you hit my door. The way you looked, half frozen and terrified. How light you were when I picked you up, like you weighed nothing at all. I remember thinking I could not let you die, that somehow you were important even though I did not know you yet." "I remember your voice," Diana said. "How kind it was even though I was a stranger. How safe I felt. Even in the middle of being so scared, I knew somehow, even then, that you were going to change my life." "We changed each other's lives," Ethan said, and Diana heard in his voice the same wonder that she felt, that after all these years they could still marvel at the miracle of having found each other. They went inside together into the warmth and light of their home and closed the door against the winter cold. The storm might howl outside, but inside there was love and laughter, family and memories, a lifetime of shared joy. Diana Sterling, who had once been cast out to die in the worst winter storm, who had stumbled through the darkness certain her story was ending, had instead found a beginning more beautiful than any fairy tale. She had found love in the arms of a cowboy with a kind heart, had built a family and a life that exceeded her wildest dreams. And as she sat by the fire that evening, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world, Diana knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey had been hard, the path treacherous, but the destination had made every step worthwhile. Ethan caught her eye across the room and smiled, that same smile that had warmed her heart for more than 40 years, and Diana smiled back, secure in the knowledge that their love story, which had begun in such darkness and despair, would shine brightly for generations to come. Their great-grandchildren would tell the story one day of the woman who was cast out into the storm and the cowboy who opened his door, of how love could bloom in the harshest conditions and grow into something strong and lasting. They would tell it as a tale of hope and redemption, of second chances and the power of compassion. But Diana knew it was more than just a story. It was her life, their life, and every moment of it had been real and precious and worth living. As the fire burned low and the family began to disperse to their own homes, Diana and Ethan climbed the stairs to their bedroom, moving slowly but together, still hand in hand after all these years. They prepared for bed with the ease of long practice, and when they finally lay down, Ethan pulled Diana close, her back against his chest, his arm around her waist. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I love you too," Diana whispered back, "always and forever." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing body in white, but inside the Sterling house, all was warm and peaceful. Two hearts beat in unison, two lives completely intertwined, two souls who had found in each other exactly what they needed to not just survive, but to truly live. The story that had begun with a desperate knock on a door in the middle of a storm had grown into something magnificent, a testament to the fact that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to our greatest blessings. Diana had lost everything that terrible winter night, but in losing, she had gained something infinitely more valuable. She had gained herself, her strength, her worth, and she had gained Ethan, a love so deep and true that it had sustained her through decades and would continue to sustain her until her final breath. As sleep claimed her, Diana's last thought was one of profound gratitude for the storm that had driven her to Ethan's door, for the cowboy who had opened it without hesitation, for the life they had built together piece by piece, day by day, year by year, for every moment of joy and even for the sorrows, because they had faced them together and emerged stronger. She had been cast out into the darkness, but she had found her way to the light. And that light, embodied in the man who held her close, had never dimmed, never faltered, never failed her. It was, she thought, as consciousness slipped away, a very good life indeed, the best life, the life she had always deserved but never knew how to ask for, until a winter storm and a kind cowboy had shown her what was possible. And in the morning, when she woke to find Ethan still beside her, still holding her close, still looking at her with love in his eyes, she would be grateful all over again for the miracle of their story, for the beautiful accident of fate that had brought them together. For now, though she slept, peaceful and content, wrapped in the warmth of love and the security of knowing that no matter what else happened, she would never be alone again. She had Ethan, and he had her, and that was enough. That was everything. The storm had passed, but the love it had created would last forever, a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt lost or cast out or unworthy. Diana and Ethan's story proved that redemption was possible, that second chances were real, and that love, true love, could transform even the coldest winter into the warmest spring. And so their story ends where all the best stories end, with love triumphant, with a family gathered, with two hearts beating as one. The woman who was cast out had found her home. The cowboy who opened his door had found his heart's desire, and together they had created something beautiful and lasting, a legacy that would outlive them both and inspire generations yet to come. In Body, California, where the winters were harsh and life was hard, where gold fever had brought thousands and abandonment had driven most away, one small ranch stood as a testament to the enduring power of compassion, courage, and love. The Sterling Ranch, where a family had been built on the foundation of a single act of kindness, where children had been raised to value integrity and generosity, where love had conquered all. Diana Sterling, who had once been Diana Sutherland, who had once been a frightened widow with nowhere to go, had become a pillar of her community, a mother and grandmother beloved by many, and most importantly, the wife of a man who had never stopped seeing her value, her beauty, her worth. And Ethan Sterling, who had once been a lonely cowboy with a good heart and simple dreams, had become a husband and father, a rancher and a builder of legacies, a man who had changed one woman's life and been changed by her in return. Their story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though it had started that way. It was a story of everyday love, of choosing each other morning after morning, year after year, through good times and bad. It was a story of partnership and respect, of laughter and tears, of building something meaningful together. And it was a story that even now, as they aged and slowed, was still being written, still unfolding, still adding chapters of love and joy and family. Because the best stories do not end with happily ever after. They continue on, evolving and growing, finding new ways to demonstrate what love really means. Diana and Ethan Sterling had found their happily ever after that winter night when he opened his door and she fell into his life. But more than that, they had created a happiness that lasted, that deepened with time, that spread out to touch everyone around them. They had taken the worst thing that ever happened to Diana and transformed it into the best thing that ever happened to both of them. And that, more than anything, was what made their story worth telling, worth remembering, worth believing in. Because if love could bloom in the middle of the worst winter storm, if two broken people could find healing in each other's arms, if a single act of kindness could ripple out to create a legacy of love, then there was hope for everyone. There was possibility in every disaster, potential in every ending, and the promise of new beginnings even in the darkest nights. Diana and Ethan knew this truth in their bones, had lived it every day of their long marriage. And as they drifted off to sleep together, as they had done for more than 40 years, they carried that truth with them into their dreams, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring another day of love, another chance to be grateful for the miracle of each other, another opportunity to prove that true love never dies. Their story, which began with a storm and a stranger's kindness, had become a love story for the ages, a reminder that the best things in life often come from the worst moments and that opening your door to someone in need might just be the best decision you ever make. And so, in Bawdy, California, in the year 1894, as winter settled over the high Sierras once more, Diana and Ethan Sterling slept peacefully, surrounded by the life they had built together, secure in a love that had withstood every test and emerged stronger, a love that would endure until the end of their days and beyond, living on in the hearts and memories of everyone they had touched. The cowboy had opened his door, and in doing so had opened both their hearts to a love that would last forever. And that was the greatest gift of all.